With you in the chair, I'd remind you of the hearing we had yesterday dealing with Veterans Affairs and the opportunity that we had to discuss the implementation of something we now refer to as the Choice Act. One of the successes, and in my view, one of the few successes that we had, in fact, with the Senator Sanders being on the floor as well, one of the successes we had last term was the passage of the Choice Act, in which Congress, responding to scandal within the Department of Veterans Affairs, the fraudulent wait lists, the lack of services available to veterans who were waiting, a number of veterans falling through the cracks, Congress responded and passed legislation now referred to as the Choice Act. And what that Choice Act said in simple terms is if you are a veteran and you are unable to receive the services you need from the Department of Veterans Affairs within 30 days, or if you are a veteran that lives more than 40 miles from a VA facility, the Choice Act allows you, in fact, requires the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide you with services at home if you so choose. Your choice. And what we've discovered, that bill was passed by Congress in August of 2014, signed by the President in September, implemented since then, beginning in November, and it's now March of 2015. What we've discovered in that period of implementation is there are a number of pitfalls by which veterans are not receiving the care that we indicated they would receive following the passage of that legislation. A lot of that problem is related to the 40-mile provision. Again, if you live more than 40 miles from a VA facility, the law says the VA will provide you, the Department of Veterans Affairs will provide you with service, if you so choose, with a local provider. And a couple of things happened. The interpretation by the Department of Veterans Affairs of a couple provisions have precluded a significant number, in my view, of veterans from being able to utilize this choice program. Yesterday, the Department of Veterans Affairs, to their own credit, decided that they had been interpreting the law incorrectly. That provision related to as the crow flies, meaning that the 40 miles was to be computed as the crow flies, was the way the VA determined that they were required to interpret that provision. Yesterday, the Department of Veterans Affairs decided they had the authority to really make that 40 miles highway miles. So if you happen to live on one side of a lake or one side of a mountain, it's no longer as the crow flies. That's a piece of good news. But here's the issue that I've raised numerous times, and here's the issue that still remains a problem for many veterans. I smile when I say this. There's not many lakes in Kansas. There's not any mountains in Kansas. And so as the crow flies is not the significant issue to most Kansans as it is in many other places in the country. But yesterday's decision by the department increases the number of veterans who may qualify for the Choice Act. What, among other things, is still missing is the idea of a facility within 40 miles. The problem is this: the Department of Veterans Affairs has interpreted and continues to interpret that to mean even though there is a VA facility within the 40 miles that does not provide the service the veteran needs, it's still a facility within 40 miles, and the veteran will be required to transport themselves to the hospital 2, 3, 4 hours away. I've said this before on the Senate floor. As a House member before coming to the Senate, I represented a congressional district of thousands, tens of thousands of square miles, larger than the state of Illinois. There is no VA hospital within that congressional district. We then worked hard to create outpatient clinics where routine services could be provided closer to home for those veterans. Now we're saying that if you can't access the care that's more than 40 miles from you, from your home, the VA is going to give you the option of seeing your hometown doctor, be admitted to your hometown hospital. But here's the problem. Here's one of the problems. Is if there's an outpatient clinic within that 40 miles, even though it doesn't provide the service that you as the veteran needs, the VA says you don't qualify for the Choice Act. Now, I'm of the view they have the ability to interpret that law differently. They say it takes a legislative change. I'm not sure that there's a lot of value in continuing to have the debate about who's right about that. What I do know is that there are many veterans in Kansas and across the country who are not receiving the services promised by the Choice Act because there's an outpatient clinic within the 40 miles, but it doesn't provide what what service they need. Just to give the folks an understanding of what we're talking about, most outpatient clinics don't provide colonoscopies. So you need a colonoscopy, you're a veteran, the VA is to provide that service. And in the case of where I come from, my hometown, the VA hospital's 3 hours away. The outpatient clinic's a half hour away. Because there's an outpatient clinic a half hour away, you can't utilize the Choice Act, but the outpatient clinic doesn't provide colonoscopies. So you're told by the VA, you got to drive the 3 hours to the hospital in Wichita to get the colonoscopy. Well, there's a community hospital within that area, within your hometown, that provides colonoscopies. This is what the Choice Act was designed to accomplish, is service provided at home. So, what I'm doing, what this amendment does, is create a deficit-neutral reserve fund that requires the VA to utilize its current authorities to offer community care to veterans who are currently unable to receive the health care services they need from a VA medical facility within 40 miles of where they live, because they are denied because they have a facility, even though the facility can't provide the service they need. This is something that we ought to be able to resolve. This amendment is widely supported. There's legislation S-207 that I've introduced with many co-sponsors, Republicans and Democrats, and we'll continue to push this legislation. In fact, the VA committee, our Veterans Committee, has indicated they will not only have the hearing we had yesterday on this topic, but also the chairman and the ranking member and their staffs will work over the recess to get this legislation front and center in our committee and presumably on the Senate floor. And this amendment is co-sponsored by Senator Collins and Senator King of Maine, Senator Tester, Senator Blunt, Senator Toomey, Senator Hoeven, and Senator Vitter. Republicans and Democrats from states across the country realize this is something that needs to be resolved. And while I believe the Department of Veterans Affairs should resolve this, they haven't. While the Department of Veterans Affairs believes Congress should resolve that, we haven't. What I do know is that veterans who are entitled to care are not receiving it, and in a sense, false promises were made until we get this issue correct, and the VA then implements the Choice Act as intended. This is an important issue, and I would say just to my colleagues, particularly those who served in the Senate with me in the last 4 years, in my view, we haven't accomplished much in those 4 years, but one of the areas in which we did come together, did pass significant legislation, is the Choice Act, and now we need to make certain that that accomplishment results in the benefits of those who are entitled to those benefits receiving them. Who, I would ask, who in this country would we expect to have the best quality health care? Who would we expect? I think it would be those who served our country, our military men and women, those who retired and became veterans. And I would say that the employees and members of Congress, they have the opportunity of choosing a hospital or a doctor. Our veterans ought to have the same opportunity. So, Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to explain this amendment. I ask for support when considered during the budget consideration. I would ask my colleagues to join me in co-sponsoring the underlying legislation that will follow. And I thank my colleagues on the Veterans Committee, and particularly the chairman, the senator from Georgia, Senator Isaacson, and the ranking member of the senator from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, for their commitment to see that this is accomplished. And I appreciate the opportunity to explain one more time why this is something of significance, and the quality of life of our veterans is affected, not because we don't want to care for them, but because we lack common sense to implement a law when we know how it should work, we know what it should say, and yet we're impeded from accomplishing what matters so much. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is an American issue that mostly calls for common sense. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield to the senator from Illinois.
The senator.